You know, in the process of getting ready to plant the church and wondering what God was going to do in terms of a building or what we should do as a building, I was asked to do a wedding that ended up being in this particular building. And when I walked in and knew that they'd been looking for an interim pastor, I was kind of blown away when I saw the thing. It was just absolutely beautiful. So the next day I brought Sherry to the wedding with me. I said, "You've got to see this building." Lapel mic stopped working right before the ceremony was supposed to start. So the custodian comes up and he says, "Pastor, how do you get a pastor?" And I'm like, all right, great. God, is this it? So I just told him, I said, "Let's get this wedding ceremony finished and then we'll talk about it afterward." We get done with the ceremony and the custodian came back to us and said, "I'd like to give you a tour of the building." And so the tour went about for 2 hours. He's telling us all the history of the building and everyone who was involved and the history of the church and everything that it had been. And so we walked through every part of the building, and it's a huge building, and we're winding around. We get up to the third floor, what is now part of the children's area, and we came up to what was the choir room. And outside the choir room, they had all the chairs set up with the little desks and the chalkboard with the lines on it and all the music that goes with it. And I walked in, and I happened to notice to my right there was a door, and it was up about 3 steps. And I asked him what was in that, and he opened the door for me, and I said to Sherry, I turned to Sherry, I said, "You know what this is?" And she said, "What?" I said, that's an engineering room. That's an engineer's room." I said, She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, this is going to be a recording studio. This is where we're going to put a window right here, and this is where they're going to, have all the equipment to be able to do this." And she laughed, and I said, "Well, you watch." I said, this is what that's going to be. This is before we ever had the building. This is before they ever came to us and said, "Would you like to be a part of what we're doing, or we'd like to help you plant Mosaic." I just had this, I just walked in, I knew that was what it was supposed to be, and I knew what God was going to do, sort of. And to me, it was just a matter of time.
So I've been recording music for about 10 to 11 years. It all started out back when my band 10th Runner Up was going through the process of recording our first album. We spent about $6,000 recording and putting together our own products, and at the end we weren't so happy with the product that we got. There wasn't a lot of personalization there. We felt like our touch wasn't included in the production of the CD. We didn't have a lot of input with what we wanted to do with the music, and the end product just didn't feel like it was our own. So when it came time to record our next album, we decided to invest in studio equipment and microphones and an interface that would plug into the computer with software that we could have our own, we could make our own destiny. So we went down to Guitar Center and got the equipment and got back and started recording at our drummer's house here in Mansfield. And it took us about a year and a half to get the first project done. We went from the first take to the second take to 3 times recording the album, because along the way we learned so much. And I learned so much as an engineer with how the music needed to come out and what tones we needed and what worked and didn't work vocally and even room-wise, what we needed. So after a year and a half, we released our first home-recorded album, and it felt like us. It represented who we were as a pop-punk band, and we were really proud of that.
My wife and I, from the time we got into ministry, and God kind of moved us into doing what we're doing, one of the things we've always talked about is we're artists letting artists be artists. My wife is an incredible musician and artist. I was a painter, sculptor, drawer, and quasi-musician. But we're both artists, and we'd watched artists for years in the church not be able to express themselves, not be able to function the way they're designed, to be sometimes even treated with contempt. And so when we planted Mosaic, we were just passionate about letting artists be artists. And to me, one of the natural expressions of that was to allow musicians to be musicians, to function the way they're designed to function, to love them with all their quirks and foibles and all the things that come with being an artist, and then give them the best opportunity to expand what they're doing. Because artists aren't just musicians, they're not just painters, they're not just people who draw or sculpt. artists are also engineers and videographers and recording studio technicians and camera people and photographers. I mean, there's just so much that encompasses art.
We had written a lot of music at the church, and we had tried a couple different studios out in the area, and it just wasn't working out. There wasn't really like a natural flow to what we were doing versus how they were recording and the amount of time they allowed us to be creative. So we had thrown the idea around of possibly starting our own studio within the church because of the amount of original music that we're putting out. And right around that time, Tony introduced me to Jake.
So flash forward 10 years later, I moved back to the area and met Matt. I started going to Mosaic, and I got a phone call from my friend Chuck, who said, hey, we're hanging out at Matt's house tonight having a bonfire.
He had his own equipment, had some software, and so that relationship got kindled and we began to talk.
And we went from that first few weeks of interaction to finding our own space in the church, which was an old choir room.
We spent probably the first 3 months just cleaning out the room. And from there, we decided to begin to move the equipment in. We were just in the one space. We didn't have the small room attached to the studio yet. And we finally got our drum set in here, and we realized that it was so loud that it would be really tough for the engineer to sit in the room with the drummer or with the instrumentalist and be able to record.
There was always this kind of dream that this room outside the studio, which was a storage closet, would become a control room.
So we threw that idea around with Tony, and he said, hey, there's this guy, Craig, that's been coming to the church. He is from the Norwalk area, and he's thinking about coming to the men's Bible study on Saturday. And so maybe talk to him. He's like a demolition guy, and so he may have the ability to do something like that.
And one Saturday, Craig Grimes came up and looked at the space that we had, and we just said, we just need a hole knocked in the wall.
We come up here, and I said, well, that's just child's play. We can build whatever you want. And he just looked at me and said, really? And I said, yeah. I said, well, let's go. And that day, we started making a hole. And that is what's behind me, is the two windows, is the hole.
Kind of fast forward through, like a week later, he's in here with a bunch of guys, walls demolished, knocked out, he's getting the windows put in. As that project's happening, he says to Jake and I, he's like, hey, don't studios have like vocal rooms or something like that? And he had no clue anything about sound or music or anything like that. And we said, yeah. They do. They have like condensed areas for doing vocals and recording instruments. And so he goes, well, you want me to build you a couple? And we're like, I guess, that'd be incredible.
They really didn't have no material. They didn't have no drawing of what they wanted this room to look like or anything. So we just made the hole, and then a lot of the guys had some of the material here and there, so we just put everything together, and this is what the Lord came up with.
It was probably like 5 to 6 weeks. He had the studio completely built, and it was all donated labor from men at the church. It's just incredible to see kind of how God orchestrated all of that, and to see how he brought everybody together to make it happen. And I mean, there was probably 20 to 30 guys that really put their heart into it. We had our friend Don Starkey did all the electrical, he did all the sound electrical work, and our friend Eli Mitchell did all the electrician work. Jake and I really just had a dream to have this studio appear, or make it, somehow that it would be here. And to see, how complicated and how much it took and how many people and skill it took to actually make that happen was just mind-boggling. It was crazy because, we thought maybe we could just put a hole in the wall with a Sawzall or something like that.
Yeah. Tony told, when we first started, we come up here, and then Tony pulled me aside and he says, look, Jake and Matt are not supposed to touch a hammer. He said they can't get hurt. So when we started tearing down the upper cabinets and the closets and stuff, they were just standing there like they were itching to get in there like little kids. So we let them swing the hammer a few times. and then I had to kick him out.
You know, I think a part of it, frankly, is to prove God's faithfulness. That He does give us vision, He gives us dreams, and He gives us hopes, and He gives us a desire to accomplish things. He gives us little glimpses of what can be, and then as we patiently wait for Him and we move along with Him and will hopefully obey Him, He begins to bless us in ways that is beyond us. I mean, the incredible thing about the studio is that it wasn't engineered at all. It wasn't anything we went in and said, listen, I said this 5 years ago, now let's make it happen. We didn't touch it again for 3 years. We didn't even look at it again for 3 years. I knew what it was supposed to be, but it wasn't up to me to engineer it. And so I think what God continually shows us at Mosaic through the most mundane things is just how incredibly faithful He is and how incredibly generous He is, and that He thinks of every tiny little detail. And that honors Him, and it increases our faith. Everything we do here, everything Mosaic does, everything, the environment we've created, and that God is really the center of, we want desperately to be able to bless the community with that. And so whether it's planting a tree in the front yard to beautify the property, or have a recording studio that not only enables our artists to express themselves and to function in their giftedness, but also to allow other artists to come in. The joy of watching that thing coming together, I had to giggle inside a lot, because there was no doubt in my mind what it was supposed to be the first time I saw it. And to see it come to fruition is awesome. God does that every time we turn around. It doesn't matter what it is. He gives us a vision of what can be. He causes us to pray over it, and then we wait patiently. We try to listen as closely as we can. And I'm desperate for Mosaic to be a vessel through which God shows His children, I am faithful. I'm faithful. I love my kids, and I want them to flourish, and I want to be honored in their lives. And I think that's what He's doing.